Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
This episode is brought to you by Organifi. You know, the one thing that literally every single diet and nutrition expert that we've had on the show seems to agree on is that we need to eat more veg and get our greens and consume all natural products. But let's be honest. How many of us actually have the time? Well, recently I had the opportunity to meet some of the folks over at Organifi, and I've been absolutely blown away by them and their product. You see, Organifi is an organic superfood green juice powder that literally covers all your nutritional bases without having to eat 5 bowls of kale. It saves you loads of time, loads of money, and a lot of chewing. And really all you have to do is add water and drink it. So to check it out and save an incredible 20% off your first order, visit Organifi.com. That's Organifi.com and use coupon code SUPERHUMAN at checkout. Before we get started today, I want to let you guys know that this episode is brought to you by the online course, Creating a Meaningful Life. Now, this course is the culmination of 20 years of work and research by my personal mentor and university professor, Linda Levine, and myself. Now, in it, we teach not only the skills and strategies that we've used and taught and which are being used by life coaches all over the world to create a life of fulfillment and balance, but we also go into how you can design your lifestyle, how you can improve in every aspect, all 8 of the aspects that make a complete and rich life. And really, we share a lot of our wisdom. So if you've been inspired by the show, by some of the guests on here who seem to have these incredibly rich, fulfilling lives, I do encourage you to check it out. And of course, it is backed by a 30-day money-back guarantee. So to take advantage of a special coupon for listeners of this podcast, visit jle.vi/meaning. All right, here we go with the show.
Greetings, super friends, and welcome to this week's episode of the Becoming Superhuman podcast. Hey guys, I want to read you guys an incredible review from Cole A111 from the United States of America, who says, "Hard to find a better podcast. 5 stars. This podcast is incredible. It is rare to find a podcast that has relevant, applicable, and exciting content in each episode. Becoming a Superhuman podcast is life-changing." Thank you very much, Cole. Really appreciate that. And for anyone who has not left a review, please do so, and I will read it on the air with an energetic tone. On to today's episode, you guys. Today we are joined by Jared Kleinert, a 21-year-old entrepreneur and author, best known for his best-selling book, 20 Billion Under 20, and more recently, his newer book, 30 Billion Under 30. Totally impressive guy. You guys, Jared started out at a really young age, and he has built one of the world's most valuable networks. He regularly rubs elbows with some of the world's most influential people. Honestly, I look up to his network and just am blown away by the contacts that he has. In doing so, he has become quite the influencer himself. In fact, you've probably already seen Jared on TED.com or read about him in Forbes. Again, pretty impressive dude. Now, you guys, the goal of this interview was just to understand how Jared has achieved so much success at such a young age, but also just to see what tips he can share with us from his time amongst the world's top thought leaders and entrepreneurs and artists and more. I certainly aspire to becoming a better, not networker, but relationship builder. And I think I have a lot to learn from Jared and the way that he has created such meaningful relationships and incredible stories with these people. So throughout the episode, we talk about a lot of different things. We talked about those same relationship building skills I mentioned. We talk about the idea of networking. We talk about generational gaps. We hear some ridiculous stories that came out of Jared's network and just the places he's been and the things he's experienced. And we talked about what he's learned from some of the world's top performers, how he learned it, what he learned that got him to where he is, and much, much, much more. Honestly, guys, it was so inspiring to talk to Jared and see what he's been able to do at such an incredibly young age. And I think you are definitely going to learn a lot from him. I certainly did myself. And so without any further ado, let me introduce you guys to my new super friend, Mr. Jared Kleinert. Mr. Jared Kleinert, welcome to the show, my friend. How you doing today?
Doing well. Doing all the interviews.
All the interviews. So you've stacked all your tasks.
Yeah, my voice is going to go out at some point, and I'm just going to be like one of those mute toys that you squeeze, but it doesn't have a sound that comes out of it. But no, it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. So Jared, I tried to cover a little bit in the introduction, kind of what you do and how you do it. But I think what our audience is really wondering when they hear the story of this super young guy who got so much done so early, I think they want to know why and how. So if you could share with us your origin story, tell us a little bit about how you got started with entrepreneurship. And really what I want to know is when did you know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur? When did you know that the standard route was not going to be working for you?
So fortunately, I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs, and that probably plays a large part in the origin story. With that being said, I come from a family of entrepreneurs where a lot of family members not in my immediate family, so not mom or dad, had tremendous success. But then my parents, when they started companies, weren't as successful or weren't successful and went to more stereotypical 9-to-5 jobs as I was growing up. And so growing up, I always saw what financial success at least could look like. While a lot of my family had financial success, they were stressed. There was relationship issues here and there, or there wasn't full health. So over time, I picked up the idea that success wasn't just money, but it was all these different things. And I saw entrepreneurship as a very appealing way to potentially replicate the financial success that some of my other family members had that I didn't grow up with. I just grew up pretty middle class, not entitled to anything, but also as a way to get all those other metrics of success or pillars of success that I came to define over time. Mm-hmm. And my first business was started at 15. I made every single business mistake you can think of. Telling you what the idea was isn't even worth the time on this interview, but I made every single business mistake you can think of, the biggest of which was poor mentor selection. And so at 15, I actually had no experience and then tacked on a poor mentor to no experience. And so I was not off to a good start. My first mentor, I found out about 6 months into hanging out with him that he'd served time in prison for securities fraud on Wall Street. And so, yeah. That was a great way to start. And so I found myself at 16 having negative business experience and negative network. The positive thing was when you start finding out what you're passionate about in life, I'm sure you had a similar experience, but you start brainwashing yourself with every trade magazine or every industry read. Mm-hmm. So, 15, I was reading, or even 14 and 13, I was reading Forbes and Entrepreneur and Fast Company and all those places. And one day I came across an article in Forbes called "The Most Connected Man You Don't Know in Silicon Valley" about David Hassel.
Yeah.
You know David.
Yeah.
And so when I read that article, especially as someone who had this negative relationship with a mentor and kind of negative business experience of which I had very little, I saw in David someone who built very meaningful relationships with people and could spark authentic connections in his network. And the article was all about this dinner party he threw at a mansion he was co-living in. And not, the people like Tim Ferriss and Warren Buffett's former pilot and a pro soccer player were all coming to his dinner parties. Wow. But then, more so than that, there was companies being started through David's connections. So Summit got started because of a connection that David had made between their co-founders.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And there's a gazillion stories like that. And, so I guess the more positive origin story comes when I read that article and I offered to work unpaid in exchange for David's mentorship. Spent 2 years at his company, one unpaid and one on payroll. And that kind of skyrocketed me into everything else.
Amazing. Jared, you said something really, really interesting as a side note, which was other metrics of success besides money. And I'm really curious to come back and touch on that. Now that you have had this great mentor, and definitely David is someone I think we could all look up to for his relationship building and the businesses he's built. But what are those other metrics of success?
Yeah. And I also mentioned it in line with the fact that like my parents weren't as successful financially and that other family members had not been successful in other realms. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say I'm not, friends or really close to my family. I love them. And there are a lot of strengths that everyone has, but not everyone's perfect. And I've seen success not only as being financial, because I saw uncles, grandparents have a lot of money and yet have crazy amounts of stress or, really interesting relationships. Like everyone in my family has been divorced and remarried. And so I have a lot of branches to my family tree. I view success as like 5 parts right now, and that could change over time, but I see this being financial or, business success, professional success, whatever you want to call it, but also having good health, having good relationships, having good community, and also having a certain lifestyle, or freedom to choose a lifestyle. And so that's sort of my 5 pillars or metrics of success right now. Again, it could change, but that's what I've been running with.
I think that's pretty spot on. I would certainly agree, especially on the freedom side. I think freedom is the new currency. And I often say that I'll take $100,000 a year and unlimited freedom over $1 million a year and a 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. desk job.
Yeah. So my grandpa started a glass company and a construction company 40 years ago that now is a 9-figure company that most people will never know about because they keep pretty quiet. But my uncle and his 3 cousins run that now. My mom decided not to go into the family business, and therefore I'm not entitled to anything, which is great. Like I don't want to be entitled to anything. I want everything I build in this life to be self-made. And I do understand that coming from an entrepreneurial family still puts me in a position that's better than most, even if it's not entitled to any financial help or whatnot. I see my uncle who runs a 9-figure business and has the nice car and the nice houses and can buy whatever he wants, but he works legit, 80 to 100 hour weeks. When everyone else is talking about working 80 or 100 hour weeks, he's doing it. And that's like really hard to do, like to actually work. And he's traveling like crazy. He doesn't see his girls as much as he'd like. That's just not a lot of freedom of your time or where you go. Whereas I make a fraction of what he makes, and yet I can hop on a flight whenever I want. I can work off my laptop. I can choose exactly who I hang out with. I have a lot more of those sort of freedoms than my uncle does, despite him running a 9-figure business.
Totally. And I think that's one of the defining characteristics. I mean, you would know this better than anyone, given all the people in our generation that you've interviewed. But I think that's one of the defining characteristics of our generation is we're willing to sacrifice that bottom line for the freedom, the flexibility, the kind of autonomous nature of our work. And I think that's why so many people are freelancing these days.
It's not bad to have the other, too. Like, I don't think my uncle would give up what he has to have my lifestyle. I think he would, say that I should probably buckle down a little bit more. Which, not that I don't. I work very, very hard, but he would just want things in a certain way. And when you talk about the sort of the intergenerational bashing that goes on in the media or even just in conversations, I think it's silly. It's different generations, like different ways of doing things, different times, different tools at our disposal, different sort of companies being built. It's like completely different. So let's stop bashing. Let's go back to like bringing people together and building not only relationships, but bridges to understanding one another.
Totally. And I think there is something to be said about the fact that we don't crave stability because we've never known instability. We didn't live through the huge economic decline of the 80s. We didn't live through various wars. And so we're the first generation where we're like, stable paycheck, not that important to me. Freedom, super important to me.
Right.
Interesting. So Jared, tell us a little bit about some of the most incredible places that your networking skills have gotten you. I mean, you threw around some pretty big names. I know Bonnie, who introduced us, told me like, you won't believe all the people who are on board for this book launch. So I imagine you find yourself in some pretty interesting situations.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how much you shared in the intro, but The people I study are the top performers among our generation. So they are people who have collectively founded companies worth billions of dollars, who have garnered, over 50 million combined social media followers, who influence hundreds of millions of people with their work on a daily basis. And a lot of these people have become friends, and I want to continue building stronger friendships with some of the people I've studied. The downside is that they're all really, really busy and have pretty influential networks of their own, but they're also like spread out across the globe. So I was tweeting back and forth with someone yesterday who's in Brazil. He was one of 4 people to be an Olympic torchbearer at the 2012 London Games.
Wow.
On Brazil's behalf, because he started a pretty interesting media company called Voz da Comunidade in Brazil. But anyways, very interesting people. I think one of the sort of experiences I had very early on in the research process was end of January 2016. I was attempting to go out to Sundance from New York City. I'm based in New York, but I was trying to go on my second date / hanging out with my current girlfriend, who's actually in the book herself. She's one of the youngest feature film producers in the country. And I wanted to get out to hang out with her in Sundance. And yet we had this snowpocalypse. I don't know if you remember hearing about this on like weather reports, but we were completely snowed in. Like my first flight out of 2 was canceled going from New York to Chicago. And then I had another flight that stayed going from Chicago to Salt Lake City. And the only way I was able to make it to Sundance was because one of the book contributors, who's been a friend for a couple of years, is the youngest person to fly around the world solo. And he had his own plane. And thankfully for me, his girlfriend was trying to get into Boston from South Dakota and was also going to get stuck in Chicago because her first flight was still good, but her second flight was being canceled. So I actually last minute called Matt. He flew from Boston to New York, picked me up at Teterboro Airport.
Wow.
That's actually New Jersey. I brought an entire pizza into the cockpit of the plane just to have fun. And then we flew to Chicago. And I just slept on a friend's couch. And the next morning, went to the airport in Chicago to get on my second flight. And they were questioning how I got there because it was very abnormal. Ended up making it to Sundance, got to hang out with my now girlfriend. So, that partially saved a relationship, I would imagine, or at least helped it continue building. And then from Salt Lake, I went to meet up with 2 other book contributors who I was looking into starting a business with. And we ultimately didn't start a business together. And it was, someone who's at a global leadership level at Google and the co-founder of one of the largest media companies for our generation. And so that's sort of what I had to walk away from to make 3 billion under 30, which is part of why I'm so proud of it, is because I had to give up a lot, give a lot of the good to work on the great. Mm-hmm. That trip was definitely one of the more interesting benefits of having the relationships I do. It was being able to call upon a world record-setting pilot at the last minute to save a romantic relationship and save a business partnership. But another one that I had a couple early on as well. I was 20 when all that was happening, but when I was 16, I cold emailed Tony Hsieh, and an hour later had dinner with him in Miami because I saw that he was coming into Miami for some conference, and I was like, I got school the next day, so I can't go to the conference, but can I meet you for dinner? And he's like, yeah, why not?
Wow.
Drove down from Boca Raton, where I grew up, to Miami, had dinner with Tony Hsieh, and I still keep in touch with him. He actually endorsed my first book, and actually I saw him at Sundance at that same event and walked up to him and had a conversation. We're not that close, but he knows who I am by face. So that was cool. When I was 18, I had met a 500 millionaire maybe a few months earlier, and he was also in Miami and invited me to go to Live nightclub and party at a VIP table, the same table that Lil Wayne rents out. And so there's experiences like that, but honestly, I think the bigger value out of a network like that, outside of advancing your business or calling upon, partnerships and favors or introductions, is really just the day-to-day exchanges,
Right.
the friendships you build, even just having these people, taking up your social media feeds
Right.
is really valuable. So like my Facebook feed is littered with, amazing business advice or links to resources or articles that are, going to help me instead of these ridiculous videos that might consume all my time. Or
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. That's been one of the bigger benefits is just having these people, not even as your best friends, but having, the guests on the podcast.
oh, there's power in the fringe network.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. In fact, the Harvard Business School case study would argue that that's more powerful than the immediate network.
In some cases, yeah. I mean, like Bonnie's not in my fringe network. We're not the closest, but we're good friends.
Mm-hmm.
But like that's how I got on this show, is just through an introduction from a friend. Not the people Bonnie's not one of the 10 people I spend the most time with, but she's top 100. She's not in my 5,000 people fringe network.
Right.
But anyways, I think, I don't know, there's less value in talking about like those fun stories, but more value in really, hammering home that this fringe network is so valuable, and that it's not just about the 5 people you spend the most amount of time with, but also like the 500 you spend the most time with online.
I agree. And I think we definitely curate our own reality. And I'm like ruthless about how I kind of unfollow people. I'm hesitant to say because there's probably a lot of people. And when I see, acquaintances and stuff like that, run into them in the street and they always say like, wow, it looks like you're doing really, really cool stuff. And I immediately would love to say, yeah, I saw that you just did XYZ, but the truth is I've unfollowed anyone who's negative, closed-minded, just not doing really interesting and inspiring things. So also my feed is just an endless stream of positivity and inspiration. And I think we all have the responsibility to curate our reality like that.
One final note is that you don't get those experiences by actively seeking them. Like a lot of those experiences that I mentioned, which seem really fun, aren't the ones that I sought out. I just sought out friendships with people, and I sought to provide value to anyone I was, meeting and building relationships with. And then the fun things happen, like, being able to bring a pizza into the cockpit of a 6-seater, right, or, whatever the case is. Like that's just side effects that are fun, but there's a lot of hard work that goes into, figuring out how to provide value to that person. And then, always, being selfless with your time and caring about other people. Like caring takes up a lot of energy, and it should be your default standard, but that's the more important stuff. I think the fun stuff comes later, and it might not come out at all.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a really good jumping in point. I wanted to ask you, I mean, I've heard Bonnie throw around the term super connector, and I imagine that you would identify, if I asked you what's your superpower, I have a feeling you would say. I mean, am I about on point there?
Yeah. So David taught me this thing called the zone of genius. Mm-hmm. And so my zone of genius is bringing together people and ideas to accomplish bigger things for society. But
okay,
in one word, it's a super connector. Yeah,
exactly. So let me jump in on that and ask, I mean, you talked a little bit about caring and compassion, but expand for me a little bit about what that means. I mean, paint a picture for someone who doesn't, know someone like Bonnie personally, or know you personally, or know, Jason Gaynard personally. Paint a picture for me of what you and Bonnie and Jason and other super connectors do differently. What are your skills and habits that allow you to maintain? Because, I studied sociology, and we talk a lot about Dunbar's number, this idea that you can really only keep 150 people in your head at one given time. But people like you seem to have overcome that. And I've tried to overcome that with technology, creating spreadsheets of the top 1,000 people I want to keep in touch with. I have never figured out a way to beat Dunbar's number. And yet you guys do it every single day. So tell me a little bit about that and what makes you guys different.
I actually don't think we beat it.
Interesting.
I'll get to that in a second. But the default is like just being a good person. As silly as that sounds, you have to be someone of high integrity and who's kind, who cares about, like has empathy about what the other person wants or needs, which is especially good in marketing or sales or, sharing your story and things like that. But people like yourself, me, Bonnie, Jason, anyone like you've mentioned, even if we bump into someone on a random subway, we're going to treat that person respectfully and listen to them and be there, even if it's a 5-minute interaction. And so there's no need to dismiss anyone or to think more highly of yourself than other people, or to always look at it from a me standpoint. The default is like, be a good person, be nice, have high integrity. If you say you're going to do something or help someone in some way, like, do that. Where we crack Dunbar's number, or, to use your terminology, is we focus on spending most of our time with other super connectors. And I think that's sort of the most exponential idea that I've come across that has propelled me to build the network I have in the time I have. And when I mean that is, if we're going to be conscious about what we work on, where we live, how we design other elements of our life, we should also be conscious of who we spend time with. And so I spend most of my time, or attempt to spend most of my time, providing value and being a good person in conjunction with individuals who are also highly regarded in their industry, who are well connected to other people, and could serve as these entry points into all these other networks or all these other worlds. And so David was that for me in the tech world. But David, as I started hanging out with him and going to conferences that he invited me to, or even just like in day-to-day working with him and all the companies that his product 15-5 services, I would meet other super connectors. And so I would start meeting senior vice presidents at Fortune 500 companies. I would meet people like Evan Pagan, who's like the top internet marketing person of the last decade or two. Time and time again, I would meet these people, and then I would repeat the process. So I would just be a good person, but try and provide value to those new super connectors. And over time, my network has really grown exponentially because of that. And so I think we still do have a Dunbar's number, in the sense of, like, Jason actively is looking to provide value or actively conversing with 100 or 150 people. And he actually talks about this in the book, where he focuses a lot on providing value to the right people and going deep with the right people, rather than trying to keep up with everyone. But as a byproduct, because we have so many high-level entry points into different industries, we've created these fringe networks of thousands or tens of thousands of people who eventually do see our work. Mm-hmm. So that's why I say it seems like we keep up with thousands of people, but I think it's still the same amount of people we're actually conversing with on a day-to-day basis, or looking to provide value to. It's just a higher, I wouldn't say echelon, but a higher level, in the sense of those people have more influence. And so therefore we can then work together to influence more people collectively.
That's really interesting because, the more I've studied this, both in business school and in my undergrad degree, I've realized that, and you can check the statistics, like even with such powerful tools as Facebook, where you can have up to 5,000 quote unquote friends, almost nobody beats this number. And so it's a matter of like intelligently rotating that number. So, on any given time, like over a 3-month period, these will be the 150 people, and then I'll rotate and then maybe come back to the other 150 people, and people kind of come in and out of your life. But it does seem like very, very few people are actually, on the long enough term, beating this 150 people at a time number. It's shockingly accurate.
Yeah.
Incredible. So how did you learn this skill set? I mean, you mentioned David a lot and kind of shadowing him, but were there kind of any stories where you realized like, okay, this is something I need to learn how to do because this blew up in my face? Or was it just a matter of literally, I mean, I'll accept the answer if you say, look, I had a really good mentor and then another really good mentor, and I just learned to emulate those behaviors. But what I'm curious of is, was there any other kind of way? Were there any books that you needed to pick up to learn these skills, to learn? Because I'll tell you, like for me personally, I had to actually go in, and I've talked about this in podcast episodes before, where you call it kind of being a good person and so on. But for me, I had to actually learn these behaviors of, what should my body language be when I talk to these people so that they know how much I care? They know how much I'm listening. What should my habits be? What kind of terminology, vocabulary should I use? And simple tricks that I've learned actually in books to say like, hey, Jared, last time we talked 3 months ago, you were really having some difficulty, or not difficulty, but you were telling me about your book launch and how you were so excited and how you really hoped that it even surpassed your first book launch. And that level of reiteration was something that wasn't clear to me. It's something that I learned in a book. It was actually Never Eat Alone.
Oh, nice.
It's like, okay, wow. So using these memory techniques that I have and reviewing with people what they talked. I mean, sometimes people are like, really? That's what I said? And I'm like, yep. And they're like, wow, that's so cool that you remember that. people are so touched. So I'm wondering, what are some books you've read? Where did you pick this stuff up? Are there any kind of thought leaders that you follow who've educated you on this skill set?
Yeah. So funny enough, Keith was actually my first ever consulting client.
Oh, wow.
So I picked him up as a mentor and eventually a client after working with 15.5 and David. And so I definitely had and still do have mentors who help me own this skill set and own this zone of genius. But it started and continues to evolve with just a lot of mistake making.
I'm glad you said that.
It's a continual effort to read articles about the subject. Never Eat Alone is an amazing book on relationship building, as is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yep.
There's like more nuanced books, even like Jason Gagner's books, like Mastermind Dinners is really good. It's short. I don't even know if you call it a book more than a PDF, but
right.
It's really good nonetheless. But I was actually a shy kid growing up. And I remember like one of the first major events or practices that got me out of my shell, which is certainly a replicable thing for anyone at home or traveling or wherever you're listening to this. When I was 16, I went to an event called Lean Startup Machine, which it's kind of like a startup weekend type hackathon sort of event. And they were really focused on customer development. And I might get nerdy in the marketing world for a second, but the whole point of customer development is to make sure that your products or services empathize with your customers really well. So you're actually like solving their problems and making, high quality stuff that solves challenges. And so I joined like a random team who wanted to make an app to bring together models and photographers based on shared locations that they liked. So it's kind of like Tinder for models and photographers. But we had to go find photographers to ask questions of. We were in South Beach, and the only place we could find a lot of photographers was at a comic convention that was going on in town. And so here I am, I was this like 16-year-old kid, like wearing a crazy button-up shirt, like super stuffy, going into a comic convention with 3 other people. And then we had to like go find all these photographers to interview. And, we're the outcasts because we're the ones not dressed up, whereas everyone else is dressed up. And so you can just picture this image in your head. The next day we had to go find models to interview. Like we decided to go to South Beach and just walk up to any attractive girl and ask them if they modeled. And like, sure enough, like half them did. But, then I had to start asking them questions and like having customer development interviews with them about this, app that we were thinking of making, and, like taking down their phone numbers to have further conversations. And so that experience quickly got me out of my shell. It was definitely something that brought me from like very shy kid to entrepreneur. Like I would say most entrepreneurs tend to be more outgoing, but really it's just like a learned thing as I've gone on. So I've had like experiences like that where I've been forced out of my shell. I've made a lot of mistakes when it comes to relationships I've had, where I've had really difficult conversations with co-founders or like ended co-founder relationships. I've done things at 15.5 that like I got pushback on, and, over time, learned how to have these sort of growth moments in relationships where I made a mistake and I had to like own up to that mistake, and or just have a very difficult conversation with the other person or the other side of the story and find out like what was the true root of the problem. And it's harder at first, like it's never easy, but over time I've just gotten better at like having these hard conversations and these growth moments, and been better at resolving conflict or understanding where people are coming from. And so that's sort of how I build the skill a lot. It's just having a lot of these different interactions, failing a lot. The first time you completely miss a phone call with someone you've been looking up to and trying to, talk to, and then they come back and said that didn't really look good on you, then you feel like crap and you try and fix it the next time. So right. You can do a lot to mitigate problems, or if you do mess up, then you can be emotionally intelligent about owning up to your mistakes. And a lot of times that will even improve your relationship more so than just, having good things happen. I've had failed product launches where I've had like very impressive joint venture partners sign on board to help me. And then when it failed, I had to like own up to that and kind of be very transparent about what went wrong. I can't talk today. And, that garnered a lot of respect from people just because I was very transparent with where I went wrong.
Right.
And owned up to it. So yeah, there's books, there's, mentors certainly have helped me tremendously, but there's nothing that's going to beat getting out into the world and trying and, working on mistakes or finding what works in your case and then continuing to do it. That's sort of the best thing that I would suggest doing.
I love that. So to summarize that, because it really ties in with a lot of the stuff that we do in our learning courses and what we call kind of brute force learning. So you're not just learning from books, you're not just learning from experience, you're not just learning from mentors, but really learning from all of them and then embracing failure as a learning opportunity, obviously, is a huge one.
I don't know if I embrace failure. I just lower my downside. So like if I do make a mistake, rather than ghosting about it and not talk to that person again, or rather than continuing to lie, or not that I do lie, or lying to cover up a mistake, or,
sure,
something else, I just own up to it and then fix it.
I love it. And learn from it, obviously.
Yeah.
At least it sounds that way. So I love that. Thanks for sharing. I guess another question I would want to ask is, do you think that anyone, you said that you were a shy guy, so do you think that anyone can actually learn to leverage these skills? Or is this something that if it's not in your zone of genius, I think you called it, that, some people are just not meant to leverage this skill set?
I definitely think it could be learned. I'm very outgoing nowadays. One book that I did read in particular that was pretty formative was The Law of Success by Napoleon Hill when I was younger. And funny enough, I just read an article about how Napoleon Hill is, this fraud, and like there's all these different points in history that have been covered up for decades, but of how not great he was.
Interesting.
But the actual material is very good to take to heart. And one of the many laws of success was like developing a pleasing personality. And it doesn't even necessarily have to do with your personality. It matters, how you open up to others. And so I tend to ask like very open-ended questions in conversations, or, obviously like this is a different type of conversation that we're having, but in most conversations, I'll talk maybe 30% of the time and then listen 70% of the time. I really just try and get intel and learn about the other person because I genuinely care about them. Or like you find stuff to care about in that conversation, you build common ground. Mm-hmm. So if I hear someone talking about something that I have interest in, I want to learn more about and or know something about, I'll start going down that rabbit hole rather than other, jump off points in a conversation. And so a lot of these things I learned over time just by having a lot of conversations and meeting a lot of people. But I think relationship building, outgoing versus shy, I think those are definitely skills that can be mastered, if not, put more to use.
Yeah. I'm really glad to hear you say that because I used to identify more as an extrovert and I still test like an extrovert, but I certainly have very introverted tendencies. So I think I'm on the median. And I literally feel that all these skills that we're talking about, it's something that I turn on, similar to, I hold my body differently when I'm doing gymnastics. It's a skill set that I turn on, muscles that I activate that I normally don't use in my day-to-day. And it's just like pulling a tool out of your back pocket.
Absolutely. Like I definitely have times where I need to be by myself and recharge, or I'll be at a party and I don't talk to many people. I actually I network very differently than I used to. So like when I was younger, I would go to, networking events, AKA like free pizza and beer in San Francisco. I would try and meet as many people as possible. And I would attempt to, locate the most connected people in the room and sort of start talking to them. Mm-hmm. And not like pushing past people, but I would just be like really excited to go meet as many people as possible and have, quick 5 or 10 minute conversations. Now I much prefer to, meet 5 people or less in an event and have 10, 15, 20, 30 minute conversations with those people. If you find yourself at the right events, then you don't have to, pick between everyone in the room. Sort of anyone you bump into left or right is going to be amazing. But also you just get deeper with those people. And it goes back to the same principle we were talking about before, which is your Dunbar's number. Mm-hmm. And, if you walk away from an event and have a meaningful relationship with one new person, I think that's a win.
Yeah, absolutely. And it certainly reminds me a lot of what Keith Ferrazzi has to say about creating friends, not contacts. And that was one of the most impactful lectures that I heard at Summit was actually Keith talking about that and just this idea of like go deep instead of wide. It's been so true.
And Keith's outgoing nature stems in part from not asking the right questions in conversations. And so I've been at his house and seen him operate dinner parties where he will, throw out a very absurd question. Like he'll find a couple at the table and be like, how's your sex life? And that quickly gets people out of their shell and sort of polarizes them to either engage in the conversation in a very transparent and meaningful way or, become super shy and not really open up to people. And more often than not, at least with the right groups of people, you'll get honest answers to those sort of questions. And I wouldn't say that that's necessarily outgoing. It's just having the skill of knowing types of questions to ask, when to ask them, being emotionally intelligent about whether or not the other side of the table can even handle a question like that if you threw it their way. There's all those nuances that have nothing to do with introversion versus extroversion. I think those are, more skill-based and learning how to have empathy or even draw things out of people. It's almost like being a good interviewer.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I actually was just thinking to myself, oh my God, I've burnt through 40% of the time that we have together, if not more. And I'm totally just going off on an interest tangent, which I think makes it a better interview personally. But on that note, let me go ahead and change gears because I want to have some time to talk about your book. So you've interviewed a lot of the world's best, similar to what we do here. More, I would say, on the business side than I have, certainly. But I'm interested to hear, what top level tips that you've gleaned. I mean, I recently did a summary of our first 100 episodes, and I was really able to pull away 5 big themes that not everyone, but almost everyone does. So I'm interested to hear, among these top level performers, what are some of those recurring themes that you've seen come up over and over and over again?
Sure. Everyone loves numbers, so I'll pull out a 3-step process.
There we go.
That we gleaned. But I mentioned this in the intro of the book that there's a reason why I plucked out these top performers, and particularly why I think they're interesting that they are millennials, because I don't really like the stereotyping of people by age. But the fact that all the people in 3 billion under 30 are in their 20s or very early 30s and have accomplished so much is very interesting. It makes them outliers because that's a very short amount of time in life and or in their industry to have accomplished so much. And so you could say that their rise is exponential, right?
Right.
That would be the definition of exponential. So that makes them outliers worth studying. And I think the biggest takeaway or overarching theme that someone could walk away with from 3 billion under 30 is how to achieve exponential success and impact in record time. And the kind of the 3-step process I saw, happening over and over and over again through these different stories is that, step 1, all these contributors found a way to step outside of their institutional paths or their kind of the predefined path to success and at least test new ways to redefine success. And so with Matt Mullenweg, who founded WordPress, for example, he started making open source software at a time where everyone else was making closed software. And so that was against the grain. He did something that no one else or very few people were doing. Similarly, if you look at, the social media influencers of our time, someone like Shonduras, who's in our book, had the first ever branded Snapchat story with Disney. And he, first being on Snapchat as early as he was and trying to use that to build influence was unique, whereas most people were, either building influence on other social media platforms or not building influence on social media at all. Here he was, kind of trying to tinker in an industry that was barely defined yet. And then he started using it to make sponsored content. And that was against the grain. I can go down the line. There's even a girl in Iran right now who's a professional moto superbike rider. Her name is Banaz, and women are not even allowed to own a license in Iran, to ride motor vehicles. And yet she's going against the grain and training off-roads to become this moto superbike rider and has now won professional races internationally.
Wow.
And so all these people are picking these ways to go against the grain, and that sets them up for exponential success later on because they are testing their new ideas in ways that are not very capital intensive or not very time intensive. But like if it works, then they will end up in a much farther position than everyone else because they're playing by a different set of rules.
I love that.
That's step one, is like give yourself a chance to have exponential impact by going against the grain or being experimental even. And this happens over and over and over again. And then one idea will take off. It's that sort of game. Step two is that a lot of these people out collaborate the competition and they find ways to, just collaborate. They build media platforms that have contributor networks. So like the founders of Elite Daily, Levo, Odyssey Online, Upload VR, Futurism, and a couple other media platforms are all profiled in 3 Billion Under 30. Mm-hmm. And almost all of those media companies have contributor networks where they allow other people to come in and help them make the content. So that's a very collaborative media process versus our old media system where it was very much, staff writers and journalists, detailing all the content. And so that has really changed how media works. And these sites are getting way more views than the pre-existing system because they bring in other contributors. And it's not just in the media realm. It's, if you want to go back to the social media influencer world, like they do collaborations all the time to help them quickly build their audience, where they'll work with another social media influencer and then they, cross promote their ideas. Or, open source software by definition is very collaborative because you're allowing anyone to come in and change your code and, copy it and call it their own. Like a lot of the people in the book have taken on very collaborative mindsets and maybe even have made structures by which they benefit from collaboration. 3 Billion Under 30 is an example of both of these steps so far, where we made a new publishing company in order to professionally self-publish the book. So we took it out of the traditional publishing world for like 15,000 reasons. I mean, that's a hyperbole, but maybe like 15 solid reasons why we took it out of the traditional publishing world and put it in this own world where if it doesn't work, I can always go back to the traditional publishing model. But if it does work, I'll end up with, a much bigger business and all the customer information of people who buy my book and like all that sort of stuff. There's tremendous upside. And then, I've made it a very collaborative process where I didn't just share my ideas in a book, but I actually had 75 other people write their own stories in the book and contribute.
Wow.
I only write maybe 10 pages of my 376 page book. The other pages are written in first person by my book contributors.
Incredible.
In order to find those book contributors, I had about 50 people send me referrals and about 25 turned into contributors. But, even in like 3-second emails to Seth Godin and James Altucher and Tony Hsieh and those people, most of which I didn't know or still don't know, they responded with a name or made a quick introduction. And that led to people in the book. And so I've had like hundreds of people touch this project. And that's a much different way of doing things than, past generations or more closed environments where collaboration isn't sought after. So a lot of the book contributors do that. And that's kind of the second of 3 steps to them having this exponential rise. And then third, real quickly, is a lot of them own their own distribution networks, meaning they build up their own social media followings. They build up their own email lists. They build up their own like mini media machines. And that allows them to have complete ownership and freedom over the ideas they share and who they share it with. And it also gives them more power to go back to step number 2 and have leverage in collaborations. And so we're living in a world where, media or, distribution is becoming increasingly decentralized.
Right.
And if you want to have impact on other people, you are going to need to have your own distribution network.
Exactly.
Which is also a great opportunity. It used to be where you had to go to a publisher or a media company or another gatekeeper to share your ideas with the world. But now you can make a podcast like you have, or build an email list, or have some social media influence, or build some other distribution network to share your ideas without anyone ever getting in the way. those are 3 steps that a lot of these people have taken to have exponential success and impact. And, I've certainly been eating our own dog food and learning from that research myself. The 3rd step we're still working on, but we'll see how it goes.
I love that. And it reminds me of a good friend of mine, Anthony Metivier, who says, don't just own the car, also own the bridge and the toll gate.
Nice.
And it's exactly that. And I learned that very early on. I really love Udemy and I love iTunes and I love Amazon. But if you really want to do impactful things, you need to own your own distribution.
Right. Especially if you come from the place where you just came from in that saying, our parents or our grandparents would say, own the car, own the bridge, own the toll gate in order to have complete security and control, and then be able to use that to charge others or, to make more money. But the way we're talking about it is so that you can use it to positively influence others and use it to maybe further collaborate.
Exactly.
And so that's a much different way of owning your own distribution network than was previously thought of.
Well, and it ultimately comes down to building relationships. Like you need to own your own distribution so that you can really build authentic relationships with your audience.
Yeah.
And that'll never happen if you're not allowed to communicate freely with them.
You got it.
So that's what it comes down to. Love it. So, wow, I have a lot more questions here on my list and not a lot more time. So I do want to ask, how is this book different from the previous one that you wrote?
In terms of how we're selling it or how we structured it?
Well, I mean, I imagine it's worth reading both books, but what am I going to get out of the 3 billion book that I might not get out of the 2 billion and vice versa? I mean, which book is for which reader?
They're both structured in the same way. They both have 5 parts: start, risk, journey, learn, and succeed, which we found to be 5 steps to finding and acting on your passions in life. Mm-hmm. Both books share stories from 75 top performers, in a certain age range. 2 billion under 20 had stories that were from people who were 20 and under at time of writing. And so the issues, the ideas, things that are covered in that book are different than the one in 3 billion under 30. And I think that the main takeaway from that book was showcasing why young people hold more power than ever before. And that was actually the title of a TED Talk I was invited to give after the first book came out. And I think that's what the book accomplished, is it showed that we should stop sort of clapping when a 15-year-old makes a nice scientific invention and patting them on the back, and instead really pay attention to what they're doing and incorporate their ideas into the global problem-solving conversation. The messages shared in 3 billion under 30 are different because now we have people who are contributors that are founders of much bigger companies or who have much bigger influence. I would say like the 7-figure entrepreneurs from 2 billion under 20 became 8, 9, and 10-figure entrepreneurs in this book. The micro influencers became full-blown celebrities, but also the industries covered are different. We have people that are tastemakers in artificial intelligence and virtual reality and social media marketing, in social issues like abuse against women and preventing that, or, different like hardware technology. There's just a lot of different issues covered, different storylines that come from mothers and come from people who have fiancés, people who have children. I guess that's mothers, but there's different people in this book. And I think the takeaways from 3 billion under 30 are much more age agnostic and industry agnostic. It goes back to how do you achieve more in the next few months than you have in the past, decade, or how can you accomplish more in the next few months than most people have been able to in entire lifetimes in previous generations. That's sort of what the people in this book have done, and what I hope other readers could do from their experiences and from their lessons that are shared. And then, the final thing I would note is that with 2 billion under 20, we traditionally published it. And unfortunately, that meant I also didn't know who bought the book. And so I can't talk to my readers long term.
Yep.
Whereas 3 billion under 30, we professionally self-published it. We actually, I think, we made a better product because we had better editors, better designers, touch the book with the same high quality hardcovers printed from like the same exact offset printer. And I can actually have a relationship with everyone who buys 3 billion under 30 because I'm going to get a name, I'm going to get an email, a phone number from everyone who buys this book because I own the distribution, which means, they won't just get the value of a book, but we can actually talk to them over time and provide them additional value. That's a big thing too. It's not just books are normally just a moment in time or like a cliff note on an era. But I think this one has a much more communal, like living and breathing aspect to it than the last book, just because I can talk to the people who buy it over time.
Love it. And that's owning the toll gate and the bridge.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So Jared, I know we've pretty much run out of time here. We're obviously going to link to both of your books in the blog post, but in case people want to learn more, get in touch with you, where should we send them?
3billionunder30.com. It's the number 3, the word billion, the word under, the number 30.com. And then feel free to email me, just Jared at 3billionunder30.com. And it's Jared like the gallery of jewelry and not like the subway guy, because he's a bad person. So
awesome. So not to end on that note, if people take away really just one message for the rest of their lives and they carry it with them forever and ever and ever, what would you hope for that message to be?
Oh man, there's a lot of messages. I only get to pick one. So I think we need people to become subject matter experts and passionate, unlike ever before, because we have these increasingly difficult problems to solve that are posing bigger and bigger threats to society, whether it's global water shortages or rising income inequality or civil unrest in various regions like the one you're in. And in order to solve those big pressing problems, we need to have a general population of people who are really, knowledgeable about what they care about, and then who work together to solve those big pressing problems and have this multidisciplinary approach to problem solving. So in much shorter terms, or in summary, become really good at what you do, because we're going to need you in order to solve global problems.
Incredible. Wonderfully inspiring challenge and message. Yeah.
It's a necessity. It's like an existential threat level ask. So don't take it away. I'm begging you, please.
I love it. I love it. So Jared, thank you very, very much for being on the show. I know your time is very valuable right now. You're in the middle of a book launch. We do appreciate it. And I hope we do keep in touch.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. This has been fun.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure. All right, my friend. Talk soon.
All right.
See ya.
All right, super friends, that's it for this week's episode. We hope you really, really enjoyed it and learned a ton of applicable stuff that can help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If so, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or however you found this podcast. In addition to that, we are always looking for great guest posts on the blog or awesome guests right here on the podcast. So if you know somebody, or you are somebody, or you have thought of somebody who would be a great fit for the show or for our blog, please reach out to us either on Twitter or by email. Our email is info@becomingasuperhuman.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.